We're live.
I think it's time we start.
I think it's time. We'll just start. Greetings to everyone. And I'm from India, so good evening from India, and good morning, good afternoon to wherever part of the world you are joining us today, this evening. From India. So I welcome you all to the Chris Freeman Centenary Lecture Series, Innovation System 102, and we are going to have seminar 4. So we, the early career researchers, started this lecture series with Innovation System 101 in January 2021. That was streamed online and till April 2021, in which we had 12 lectures and 2 panel discussion with a focus on theoretical aspect of innovation system framework. So but for the second session, which we are in right now, Innovation System 102, we focuses upon the practical application of the theoretical innovation system approach. And for this, we invited papers which followed a very stringent selection mechanism and by the experts, which was appointed by GlobalX. And this seminar is expected to give importance to basically practical aspects of using the systems approach in order to better understand the realities of realities and the complexities of the economic world. And this provides an opportunity to learn the techniques involved in using theory for practical application. So I basically encourage young researchers who are participating right now in today's as the audience to engage in the discussions which would be followed by the presentation by the 2 presenters we are going to have today. And as we have 2 presenters and at the same time 2 commenters from the core committee of Chris, and senior researchers have also joined. So the structure of the program is, first, we are going to have the first presentation by Lijing, which would be commented by Nanditha, Mathew, followed by the senior researcher. And again, Lijing will respond to the comments she is going to receive. And then we'll be moving to the next presentation by David. And that would be commented upon by Andrew and followed by the senior researchers. Then he will respond, and then we will be opening the floor for the discussion. So this is the pattern which we are going to follow. And with this, I would invite the first paper presenter, Lijing Leng. She is going to present a paper which she has co-authored with Pele Wu from Northeastern University of China. And she is going to talk on research on the technological innovation model, evolution of public R&D organization based on dynamic capabilities, taking the key state laboratory RAL as an example. So Lijing is going to present, and she has a major in industrial economics, and her research interest includes R&D achievements transformation, technological innovation, and strategic management of public R&D organizations. And with this, I invite her to present her work, and she is going to have around 20 to 22 minutes. So Lijing, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I will share my slide. Can you see my slide?
Yes, it is okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Dear experts and scholars, it's a great honor to have the opportunity to communicate here. The title of the paper I will present today is Research on the Technological Innovation Model Evolution of Public Research and Development Organizations based on Dynamic Capabilities, taking the K-State Laboratory IL as an example. I will present the paper from 7 parts. And the first part is how was the research question proposed? Firstly is the realistic background. Nowadays, with the vigorous rise of a new round of scientific and technological revolution and the industrial revolution, scientific and technological innovation presents many new characteristics. This provides a rare opportunity, but also brings unprecedented challenges for China's scientific and technological development. Under this background, as the important sources of knowledge and the key innovation agents, the scientific and technological work of PRO is also facing higher requirements, especially in the area of digital economy. The contributions of PRO depend more on the symbiotic innovation ecology, which is built with multiple innovation agents. And we can see many good examples in reality. However, on the whole, although China has become the second largest country in science and technology investment after the United States, there is a large gap in the effectiveness of R&D investment, mainly reflected in the transfer rate of scientific and technological achievements. Facing this situation, how PRO can realize the transformation of achievements transfer mechanism and technological innovation model has become an important topic of great concern. Next is the theoretical background. From the studies about technological innovation model under innovation theory are developing, including the studies under innovation system theory, triple helix theory, and the innovation ecosystem theory. Overall, from the existing studies, the nature of the technological innovation model can be regarded as the synthesis of the interaction ways between multiple innovation agents. As shown below, the studies under innovation system theory are important foundation. And the studies under triple helix theory make deeper research on the interaction ways between 3 key innovation agents in the innovation system. And the studies under innovation ecosystem theory pay further attention to the co-evolution and value co-creation between innovation agents. Moreover, the interaction ways evolve constantly, suggesting the innovation strategy orientation of innovation agents and the dynamic evolution of their technological innovation model. About the analysis on the evolution mechanism of technological innovation model, the existing studies have mainly started from the perspective of contingency and resource-based view, respectively showing that external pressure and co-resources or competencies are important determinants. However, the above 2 perspectives have some limitations and can't explain the evolution of technological innovation model well. The perspective of dynamic capabilities can overcome the above limitations. It is helpful to analyze how to constantly adjust strategies in the rapidly changing environment to obtain and maintain evolutionary fitness. Therefore, examining the evolution of technological innovation model from the perspective of dynamic habitats will provide important new insights. However, according to the literature on dynamic habitats, scholars have also focused more on the forms, and only in recent years, they have begun to analyze the application of dynamic habitats perspective in PRO context. Nowadays, as the key agents to promote industrial development and scientific and technological innovation, PRO are facing rapid changes in external innovation needs. How to respond effectively to better realize the transfer of scientific and technological achievements has become the core problem that PRO need to solve. Therefore, it is necessary to deeply exploit the application of dynamic habitats in PRO. Based on the above realistic and theoretical background, this study will analyze how PRO can make targeted strategic response to the changing innovation needs through dynamic habitats and realize the evolution of technological innovation model in that process. The second part is about the theoretical model. PRO are facing various changes of external environment. This study mainly focuses on the change of external innovation needs, which mainly include three aspects. Facing the innovation needs and their changes, PRO can make strategic response by dynamic habitats, and the concrete supporting activities involve sensing, seizing, and transforming. In this process, in order to obtain the essential information, resources, and experience they lack, PRO will interact with other innovation agents and change existing interaction ways or establish new interaction ways if necessary. Most importantly, based on dynamic habitats, PRO can not only adapt to the innovation ecosystem, but also shape the innovation ecosystem. These are ultimately reflected in the technological innovation model evolution of PRO. The third part is about the methodology. Because this study focuses on the evolution of technological innovation model, it was necessary to choose a case that has experienced the significant changes in school activities. This condition resulted in the selection of a single case study because the case was of interest due to its history and the context-specific characteristics. Finally, this study takes the Key State Laboratory IR of Northeastern University as the object of case study, as it started construction in 1989 and has made outstanding performance in the transfer of achievements and established close interaction with external innovation agents. About the data collection, this study was mainly based on interview literature and archival records. About the data analysis, this study adopted open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. In the above process, we encountered two major challenges. On one hand, how to design appropriate interview questions was a main difficulty because we focus more on theoretical research and have limited understanding of practice. Some interview questions we designed were easy to be divorced from practice, which made it difficult for respondents to understand and then give the information we need. In order to solve this problem, firstly, we clarified the core concepts their definitions and specific dimensions based on existing literature. Secondly, by consulting second-hand materials, we tried to design interview questions that were more practical. Thirdly, we had repeated discussions with scholars around us to modify appropriate interview questions. Finally, before the formal interview, we emailed the interview questions to some of the respondents for further modification. Based on the above process, the efficiency and effectiveness of our interview was greatly improved. On the other hand, how to ensure rigorousness was also a difficulty. For this, the coding of data in our study was conducted independently by two of the researchers, and any variances in the codes were discussed until a consensus was achieved. If a consensus couldn't be achieved, the third researcher would be consulted. Through such a process, the data we collected could be better raised to the theoretical level to explain the research question in our study. And the fourth part is case description and the research findings. Through data analysis, we found that IL has experienced three main development stages, and as it developed, its dynamic capabilities and technological innovation model were also changing constantly. Especially, the three elements of dynamic capabilities played important roles in the evolution of its technological innovation model. And the final part is about conclusions. Through a longitudinal case study of IL's technological innovation activities, this study analyzes the evolution mechanism of PRO's technological innovation model from the dynamic capabilities perspective. Overall, the research conclusions mainly include the following three aspects. Firstly, from the dynamic capabilities perspective, sensing, seizing, and transforming activities help PRO to respond strategically to external innovation needs and their changes. Secondly, the strategic response to external innovation needs and their changes promotes the technological innovation model evolution of PRO. Thirdly, the ability of PRO to respond to innovation needs and their changes is constantly improved, and co-evolution with technological innovation model is realized. And the sixth part is about challenges in theory. Different from the previous research focusing on firms, this study attempts to exploit the technological innovation model and dynamic capabilities of PRO. As non-profit organizations, PRO don't face the market directly. They contribute to industrial development and economic growth, mainly through the creation, dissemination, transfer, and commercialization of knowledge. Therefore, there are great differences between PRO and firms in the external environment, the interaction with other innovation agents, and the characteristics of dynamic capabilities. How to comprehensively capture these differences and better apply innovation theory and dynamic capabilities perspective to exploit PRO's technological innovation model and dynamic capabilities are the main challenges of this study. The last part is about implications for developing countries. This study is crucial to promote developing countries to catch up. In developing countries, the role of PRO is more relevant because the innovation capabilities of firms are limited. Therefore, focusing on the dynamic capabilities and the technological innovation model evolution of PRO in developing countries in order to provide implications for the management of PRO and the policymaking of government will have great significance. The above is all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lijing. It was well in time, so well concise and a very interesting presentation. Now we'll move further, and we are going to have the comments from first Nanditha Mathew. She is with UNU Merit, and she is a member of core committee of CRIS, and she has obtained her PhD in economics from University of Pisa, and she was a postdoctoral fellow at St. Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa and at National Research Council of Italy. Her research interest basically focused on the microeconomics of innovation and development. And basically she works on firm capabilities, firm performance, strategy, and innovation policy. So I invite Dr. Nanditha to give comments on Lijing's paper. Dr. Nanditha, please, you have around 7 minutes.
Thanks, Swati. Thanks, Lijing, for the presentation. It's very interesting work. So I would start the discussion from the points that you mentioned in your conclusions and relevance for developing countries, because I believe that this work is extremely relevant, especially in the context of developing countries. So I would have expected you to tell that the first slide, the fact that the role of dynamic capabilities in innovation, because in the process of growth and development, when countries move to new sectors and products, usually there are leaders and followers. But as you identified, in the context of developing economies, these leaders might not be a plural term. There might be one firm or one public research organization who might have the capabilities to help the country to move to new sectors and new products and new services, because you don't usually have the luxury of a lot of firms and organizations with such dynamic capabilities. And this is exactly why your work is very relevant. And it also often happens that even if they are firms, it happens that these are in the public sector, and which also in turn leads to the question of how does development of such advanced dynamic capabilities work within the public sector, in the public sector context. And I would have expected a bit more discussion on this. This could be also an extension on what are the differences. Why do you think that the development of dynamic capabilities, which are the processes that would be different in a public research organization compared to a private firm, for instance? So one way could be to also have another case study where you can compare a similar private organization. This could be one way to do it, because it would be nice to have this discussion. And this also leads to the second point that I wanted to mention, which is on the methodology that was adopted. There are several advantages of the methodology adopted in the paper, and the qualitative one, which allows for greater detail, a very good detail of the different activities that the state laboratory RAL did in terms of the different dynamic capabilities. So the authors were able to exactly identify. So these activities comes within sensing the opportunities in the market. These comes within the seizing the opportunities. These within the transformation. So such detailed information are usually not available on a larger scale, and this is a very strong point of the paper. But of course, it's worth mentioning that we don't know how much we can generalize these results, because this is based only on one big organization which worked on a kind of setup. So on an environment which might not be true for a different other other organizations. So I would phrase it a bit differently than what you have mentioned in the paper. Like you say that the qualitative methodology seemed appropriate because it tries to explain the complex dynamics. I would put it rather differently, that it's not that it's explaining the complex dynamics, but it helps in giving much more detailed information. So on this, I would also ask you to dig further deep, in the sense to look at, for instance, on the labor front, when the RAL started, so to look at the employee and the management side. So here we are talking about dynamic capabilities, right? So as T is pointed out, they pretty much differ from ordinary capabilities. So the ordinary capabilities would be on the line of the work of Bloom, for example, who did the work on Indian textile firms, who found that in developing countries, many organizations, those who are done on plants, but this can be extended also to other organizations, that they lack basic capabilities. So here we are not talking about such basic capabilities, but we are talking about advanced dynamic capabilities. At this point, it would be interesting to see the skills and the capabilities of the people that were part of this organization. So when such a big organization becomes successful, and when they start, where do the managers come from? Where do the employers come from? So a good extension could be to look at the labor side of the whole in the whole framework. Another extension that one could look at is also to look at the spillovers that created. For instance, you mentioned in the paper that they had different activities that involved interaction, personal exchange and interaction with other steel firms, etc. So on this front, what are the spillovers that it's slightly unrelated, but it's a very interesting question to deal with, because then you also talk about the diffusion there. And to go back to the previous point, on one side, when it makes sense to look at one individual organization, but a group of them would actually also try to understand the heterogeneous performance and the heterogeneous development of capabilities, because here we are not able to see that, right? We see only one individual organizations. And again, this relates very much also to development, to economic development and growth. Until recently, also mainstream economics has mostly treated firms and also other enterprises as like black boxes managed by, let's say, untrustworthy agents. So in your case, this is different, and this is also nice to discuss, and that how this is different for PROs. In the strategic management field, there are some prominent works that talk about how these organizations are created, how they are organized, how they are managed. So, and all this would come within the dynamic capabilities framework. And not only these, but also the outcomes, what they achieve. So while here in the paper you mention a lot about the different activities that they did, there is a bit less on the outcome front. So for instance, one way in which the dynamic capability framework differs from the transaction cost approach is that, I mean, it explains not only why organizations exist, but their scope and their potential for growth and sustained performance in highly competitive markets. So I would say it will be interesting on one side to look at also the outcomes of the development of such dynamic capabilities, which are the sectors and products that the RAL entered into, how well they did there. So these could be some angles that would be nice to explore. And also I would like some discussion on when you discuss between the resource-based view and the dynamic capabilities approach. One main thing that is nice to discuss is on the tacit knowledge. For instance, the the Penrosian resource-based view always talked about, you talked about the resources. You should discuss further what they were. They talked about capital resources, but what Thies identified was that these are not capital or physical resources that can be traded in the market, but these are resources that are routines and practices and tacit knowledge that cannot be traded. And this is why firms build on these, or also other organizations how build on these. So this would be also one nice angle and a discussion to make it. But overall, I think the paper provides very detailed view on dynamic capabilities, on what it means in practice, the different activities that can be classified within the sensing, seizing opportunities and transforming them. And I think it gives a good understanding of how this works and evolution of the technological innovation model. So yeah, thank you. I'll be happy to send these comments over an email to you. Yeah. I hope I didn't take much time.
Thank you, Dr. Nanditha. It was wonderful, and I'm pretty sure that Lijing is going to be, these comments will be very helpful in developing her paper more. And definitely, send her the comments in the email. That would definitely help her out more. And thanks a lot for this. Now, moving to the senior commentators, I would like to invite Angathevar and Baskaran, who is from the Department of Development Studies, Faculty of Economics and Administration, University of Malaya. He is also a senior research associate, such as Swati, University of Technology, Pretoria, South Africa. He holds a PhD, Science and Technology Policy Studies from Sussex University, UK. His research interest includes economics of innovation, national innovation systems, innovation and entrepreneurship, with the main focus on multidisciplinary themes related to emerging and developing economies. So I invite Professor Baskaran for his comments for paper 1. So Professor Baskaran, please. You are on mute. Just unmute yourself, please.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Swati, for your generous introduction. And thank you, Lijing. And greetings to all of you from Malaysia, where I'm based now. I would like to, of course, Nanditha has provided a number of points already, various interesting, how to improve this paper. From editor point of view, I'm a editor-in-chief of African Journal of Science and Technology Innovation Development. I guess both presenters today, young scholars, they aim to publish their research, and maybe this is one way of getting good feedback from publishing point of view. I will focus how they can improve this the paper. Number one, I will give a feedback on the paper structure, okay, and some of the issues. Number one, the title. I would expect you to make the title change. It's not really interesting the way you put it. Maybe you put evolution of technological innovation model of public R&D organizations based on dynamic capabilities. The case of RAL of Northeastern University, China. Because titles should be very, precise and interesting. The abstract, the way you have written abstract is not very interesting, honestly. You need to restructure it. I will give you my feedback. You can follow the steps. Then comes to the introduction. There's no literature review part in the paper. You have a long introduction. starting with, you set out the studies under innovation system theory, triple helix theory, innovation ecosystem theory, and then you point the limitation of existing studies on from the perspectives of contingency and resource-based view. And then you put your argument why the perspective of dynamic capabilities is helpful to overcome the limitations, and also how it is interesting to apply rather than firm. It is for public research organization. That's okay. But my suggestion is to reduce the, separate the literature review part and keep the introduction separate in a short introduction. And also you can talk about quadruple helix theory instead of just, triple helix theory. A lot of work has been done now on quadruple helix theory. And then most importantly, you must introduce the research questions in the introduction itself, and also the originality of your article. What is the original contribution you are making in this paper? Again, you must define dynamic capabilities the way you employ in this paper in the introduction itself. You talk about theoretical model. It's well presented, but how my suggestion is to elaborate the figure you presented now, and also from my understanding, you are focusing on the TIS 2007. You have drawn the dynamic capabilities concept, and you have using for your study. The question is, what is new here? Yeah, the question is, what is new in your theoretical framework? You are just employing TIS 2007 framework, and you are using a case study to apply for a case study on a one case, single case study. So you need to raise this question yourself. Yeah, maybe you have to extend it or improve this framework. Maybe my suggestion is to integrate the dynamic capability framework with innovation system framework, like innovation ecosystem framework. And also you can show that, the technological innovation model of the organization reinforces or co-evolves with the innovation ecosystem. And the technology innovation model of here is your public research and development organization in the lab. Yeah. So that way you can try to enhance your theoretical framework, show something you have introduced, some interesting new aspect to it, instead of just following TIS 2007. And in the methodology itself, what I'm surprised is you have not really discussed the data collection process clearly. How many interviews were conducted? What was the time frame within which these interviews were conducted? Whether they were semi-structured interviews, how long each interview on average lasted. And again, it's a longitudinal case study. So if you are saying it's longitudinal case study, have you interviewed your respondents at different points in time? How do you justify it's a longitudinal case study? Is it because just you are using secondary data for a period of, I don't know, what is the period? You have not mentioned it. I don't see it in the paper. So that's very important. You need to explain this very clearly. Again, the case description, case research findings, you have used figures 2, 3, and 4 to reflect technological innovation model of the RAL. But you need to separate RAL in the figure and show the linkages with the other ecosystem agents and indicate the level of quality of interactions. You see, this is where when I say you better enhance your theoretical framework, this is important because you are talking about this model, you are capturing in different stages. There are different models. This model evolved over a period of time. But the way you depicted in those figures, it's very simplistic. It's not very, interesting. Of course, your summary tables, there are a lot of information. Maybe you can use the summary table information to enhance this, these figures. So that's my view. Again, the mapping of activities, the dynamic capability activities, sensing, seizing, transforming in all the tables are not clearly separated. You are not mapping it separate, maybe you have to enhance the table itself. So this is a single case study. You need to present rich data to make it publishable. You have interviewed a lot of people. I don't see any use of direct quotations from your interviews to reinforce the data presentation. It's very important. It's a single case study. The way you can sell the case study is bring your interviews and use direct quotation, let them speak for themselves in the paper. And it's a qualitative paper, So you need to have also separate discussion before conclusion. And yeah, so I think these are the points I would like to say for the moment. I don't want to take too much time. Yeah, okay. I think I will stop it here.
Thank you very much, Professor Baskaran. It was really very, important comments on the paper so that she could make her paper publishable. And it's a small suggestion for Lijing, kindly improve the paper as has been suggested by professors, and you could just submit even in African Journal of Science, Technology, Innovation and Development, and that would be very useful for you. And since you have got the initial very important comments on your paper for your improvement. So with this, I thank you, sir. And now I'll invite the Professor Edward Lorenz to comment on Lijing's paper. Professor Lorenz is Emeritus Professor of Economics at University of Côte-d'Azur, France, and he holds the post of Distinguished Visiting Professor at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa and Adjunct Professor at Aalborg University in Denmark. His research focuses on relation between innovation, new technologies, and sustainable development. So I welcome Professor Lorenz to comment on Lijing's paper. Professor Lorenz, please.
Thank you very much
for
this opportunity. And I was asked to come in on this at the last moment. So these are a bit rough comments. I just will tell Lijing, I haven't had a chance to read the paper in great detail. I saw an earlier abstract when we were assessing different proposals about 4 or 5 months ago. Anyway, I think it's, I like this paper for several reasons. I like it because it, one is that, well, I think it does quite clearly, they explain how the research questions were conceived and why they were going into this problem, because it's stated that, while China has developed a very strong technological innovation system, it stated that there is perceptions, there are problems of technology transfer, that getting the developments out into industry has perhaps been less successful. And hence this study could be very important for understanding those limits and getting some insight into how that processes could be improved. So I think it's a good motivation, and it nicely leads into the study. The other thing is that I liked about it, and I think this makes the case study approach the only one that's really suitable, is to go into the dynamic evolution. This idea of bringing dynamic capabilities into this discussion of a PR, public research organization, and how it evolved, and trying to understand the evolution over several decades is a challenge. It's a challenge for data collection, and that was a point that Baskaran was mentioning, but it's also just a challenge conceptually to try to understand a historical process. And that historical dimension, I think, is a part that I appreciate very much. And of course, as part of Freeman's work, he always very attentive to the historical context and evolution. So I think these are very, very strong parts of the paper. And as I said, that's why I enjoyed reading it. I think, yeah, I think on the theory, I mean, it's always a challenge when you're looking at a firm or an organization and to see how you really, how does that fit into a wider innovation systems concept? That's always a challenge to try to specify that. I think perhaps it's not really necessary to refer to different theories. I mean, I think triple helix, innovation systems, ecosystems, they all have their differences. And so just to cite them is perhaps not that useful. If the one that influenced you the most was triple helix theory, then fine, stick with that for your publication. Don't feel you have to extend out. But I think perhaps rather than, you could, of course, see this as an opportunity to begin to articulate better how dynamic capabilities of an organization would fit into an innovation systems framework. But it might be also nice to have a bit more about the context of the Chinese innovation systems and how it is evolved and how this organization within a university fits into the distinctive characteristics of technological development in China. As I understand it, there was a lot of emphasis from policy and from quite several decades on universities playing key roles in the development and transfer of technology, which was a distinctive part of the Chinese policy for innovation system development. And I think some reflection or some, if I'm right, discussion about that could contextualize the example that you've gone into. It would be also useful. And that would be one thing I would recommend, even if it can't be comprehensive. On the points that, one of the points that Baskaran, I agree, there should be, I think, yes, I agree, more on the data collection. It's a case study, it's a case that you're doing, you need to have a few tables which lay out who you interviewed, what kind of actors, how many interviews, but also obviously since it's history, it's not just interviews, it's archives. And so there should be some discussion of what archives, how are they used, what kind of access problems did you get, and just give a better understanding of the challenges in the data collection process of doing historical research like this, because it's more than just interviewing people. It's finding out information, maybe from some people within the organization had been there for several decades and they could talk about what happened 20 years ago or more, but you may have to use archival documents and that requires different techniques and so on. So I think some greater discussion of that would be very useful. What other reflections did I have? This might be more where to go in the future. I think it would be useful to have the user's perspective as well, because you're looking at the steel industry. So it might be good as perhaps a future research project or a complementary to go talk to some of the key actors in the steel industry and to see how that we're interacting with RAL and to get their view on the how successful it was and what were its limitations. I think you could enrich your understanding of the its ability to pursue that transfer process by also seeing the perspective of the users. So that would be something that could be for future research. So all in all, I'll leave it at that. I enjoyed this paper, and I appreciated very much the attempt to understand this as a historical evolutionary process, which I think is not always, it's a challenge for researchers and requires a lot of data collection of many sorts. So thank you. I hope that's helpful for you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lorenz. These comments were very, very important for Lijing to improve her paper. And here from Chris, we are actually very thankful to you for joining us at this moment, because earlier Glenda, of course, is going to join us, and she fell ill and she was not able to join us today, and we requested you and you accepted our invitation. We are highly thankful for that, and it was really very helpful to Lijing and for the next presenter, which for which also we are going to have your comments, and thank you very much. And now I just request and invite Lijing for her response to the comments which she has got. Lijing, please.
Okay, thanks a lot for Professor's valuable questions and comments. I will think carefully and have further modification of my paper. Actually, when we conducted a literature survey, we found that many studies have focused more on forms and exploit their technological innovation model, such as product innovation, process innovation, open innovation, and so on. So our paper focus on PRO. Their innovation activities at the core of the studies under innovation system theory, and later developed the triple helix theory and innovation ecosystem theory. The studies under innovation system theory and triple helix theory mainly focus on the interaction between innovation agents, and the studies under innovation ecosystem theory not only focus on the interaction, but also the evolution and value co-creation between innovation agents. Our paper starts from these theories to summarize the development of the existing studies, the characteristics and evolution of technological innovation model, and raise our own point of view. In fact, we have been thinking about whether the above process is appropriate. Of course, the differences between PRO and the forms is the most of the focus in our study. So we should present some more details about this. And in addition, we focus only one case study in our study, and the context is developing countries, and more cases may get more conclusions, interesting findings. So we can think about this. And about the introduction and the process of the case study and the conclusions and the discussions, and we in our paper we should make more improvement. And thank you for professors again. So I will make further modification in my paper. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lijing, for your initial comments. And I think we should just move to the next paper presenter, and then we will later on take the questions which are there for the first paper. So the second paper presenter is David Ivan Valdes-Munguia, if I have pronounced it right. And he's a Mexican PhD student in social science research at the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, Mexico. He has a master in policy and management of technological change from the National Political Institute, and a degree in political science and public administration from the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico. His research are related to science, technology and innovation policy, politics and science, electronics and technology. And he's currently developing his doctoral research project on the changes in the Mexican science, technology, and innovation policy between 1988 and 2018. So I invite David for his presentation. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, I'm going to do that again. That's right. You can see my presentation now.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, I'm going to start. Well, thank you for the time and the opportunity to present my research. This research is based on my PhD thesis, and it is called Changes in Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Transfer in Mexico between 1988 and 2018. My name is David Valdes, and as was said before, I am a PhD student on Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, and well, I'm going to start my presentation. Well, this is the content. I'm not going to stop with this because it is a long presentation, so I'm going to go direct to the points. Well, I have to say that my program it is on political science, and that is the emphasis, and also the emphasis on my research is on public policy studies. So since there, I'm going to talk about what I did in my research. Well, it was needed for me to identify the public problem at the beginning of the period I studied. So it is in the period of the President Carlos Salinas on 1988, and the diagnosis of the problem of on STI policy was a combination of low national capacity for scientific and technological research, reduced participation of the private sector and in these activities, and an uncoordinated national science and technology system. But throughout the 5 periods of governments I studied in this long period, the same problem was repeated and the diagnosis of the plans of government in this sector. It was the lack of infrastructure and scientific and technological capabilities, lack of human resources and researchers, lack of institutional coordination of the national system of science, technology, and innovation, lack of linkages of productive sectors with STI activities, and low productivity, competitiveness, and low level of investment or financing for the STI sector, as public as well as private investment was low. All this according with the special programs of science, technology, and innovation and national development plans of Mexico. Well, so I identified that there was a dilemma here. S&T policy faces the dilemma that the change to stay the same. In other words, if the policy has changed, but the problem remains, why did the policy change? And in addition, how did it change? This leads to an analysis of the dynamics of STI policy and an established time frame. That is, it is 30 years period. So my research question I made, they are, why and how did the change in science and technology policy to incorporate innovation in Mexico happen during the period from 1988 to 2018? I want to highlight why and how questions of the change to incorporate innovation. Well, the hypothesis I manage is that the change in science and technology policy to incorporate innovation was due to the voluntary interaction between national agents involved in science policy, I mean federal government decision makers and stakeholders, and external agents specializing in an STI policy model, international organization, mainly the OECD. Well, this in a context of economic and political changes in Mexico. And talking about the how did the change happen? Well, the hypothesis is that the policy change took the form of a voluntary policy transfer process through the formation of a transfer network and an epistemic community on the innovation paradigm. My objective was analyzing the reasons mechanisms and results with which the Mexican science and technology policy changed to incorporate the innovation. It is that I want to know the reasons and forms of that change. Well, talking about my theoretical analytical framework. Well, as I said before, the stress or the emphasis of my program is in the policy studies. So this is the main approach I use for get my research. So into the policy studies, there is the policy processes, and two minor approaches I use for my research was the policy change and the policy transfer, who are related with policy learning, lesson drawing, and policy diffusion. So I understand the policy change as a change in the intrinsic properties of a policy, and the policy transfer is the process in which knowledge. This is the definition of policy transfer. It is the process in which knowledge about policies, administrative arrangements, institutions, and ideas in one political environment, past or present, is used in the development of policies, administrative arrangements, institutions, and ideas in another political environment. This, according with Dolowitz and Marsh, that they are the main authors of the policy transfer approach. Well, the singularity of my research is that these policies are investigated from change and over the time. It is that I use also an historical approach. Well, the causal inference logic of the policy transfer approach is the following. Well, I identified the independent variables, the lending agents and borrowing agents, and the interaction between these agents for the interaction of agents for voluntary, coercive, or contingent transfer conduct, or they cause the policy change. What is the dependent variable? It means that the policy transfer process cause the policy change. Well, this is the main idea of the policy transfer approach. Well, I use two models of this approach for my research. The classical model of Dolowitz and Marsh that use 7 thematic blocks for analyze the transfer, and it includes transfer agents, reason for the transfer, object of the transfer, place of the transfer, degrees, limitation, and finally evaluation or results of the policy. It means that if the policy was successfully or not, if the transfer was successful or a failure. Well, I use also the Evans and Davis model of policy transfer approach. I use this because it explains the transfer process as a process with 12 stages, different stages in which a transfer process has to pass through. It begins with the recognition of a problem, the search for different alternatives or opportunities, and contact then to the emergence of an innovation feeder network, the cognition and reception of that information, the emergence of a transfer network, an elite and cognitive mobilization, the interaction between the agents, the lending and borrowing agents, the evaluation of the policy who wants to be transferred, the making the decision, and then the process of implementation, and finally the outputs and outcomes of the transfer process. Well, it is talking about this part of policy studies, but I use some elements of the innovation theory and evolutionary theory, which I am going to look for the definitions and arguments and ideas that are used that are proposed for this theory, and I was going to look for them into the Mexican policy. So I used the concept and the definition of innovation and innovation system from the OECD, and that was the way I use this part of the theory for my research. Well, I based my research on what I called the OECD model SCI policy, which was published in the book The OECD Innovation Strategy: Getting Ahead, Start on Tomorrow, that was published in 2010, and it consisted on 14 global recommendations and 55 specific recommendations. And the base of the model is on 5 policy principles for innovation. Empowering people is the number 1. Unleashing innovation, creating and applying knowledge for applying innovation to address global and social challenges. And 5, improving the governance and measurement of policies for innovation. I also took the 4 studies made by the OECD to the case of Mexico, and they were made in the first one in 1994. It was called Science and Technology Policy Review. As you can see, there was not the innovation part in this study, and then I checked these other 3. Developing innovation system, Mexico in a global context, that was coordinated by Chimoli on the ECLAC. And then in 2009, there was another study that was called Innovation Policy Review. It was about innovation for the first time in the case of Mexico. In these 4 studies, I identified 189 recommendations that were made for the Mexican innovation policy. Well, the methodological design, I took it in this way. I had my research question: why and how did the change to incorporate innovation in Mexico? And the methodology, I decided, as I considered that it was a long time and it was a process, I decided to use the process tracing as a methodology. Even I use a theory testing process tracing in my research, and I use the Evans and Davis model for this purpose. I used the Evans and Davis model as the theory I was testing. So for the data collection, I use semi-structured interviews and documentary analysis, and I use also, well, the questionnaire I designed, and I use an hermeneutic unit with the Atlas T software for my research. Also, an analytic matrix for doing the documentary analysis of the plans, programs, and the policy of STI in Mexico. Well,
David.
I think there's a connectivity issue.
Yeah, there is some issue. We just wait for a few minutes and see. Yeah, I think his connection is lost. He has. Gone.
This is totally normal, you know.
Yeah,
We can be patient.
Yes.
Let's say it's certainly interesting. We've been talking about introducing more political science perspective into systems of innovation explicitly, at least within LALIX. We're, identifying challenges as we were going forward in a research project that we presented at GlobalX. So I think it's certainly worth it to bring David in and actually introduce him to LALEX a little bit more, and the GlobalX. I think that's something that this Chris process is doing, is opening up some doors of our interaction through a more flexible space. I think that's really positive.
Or we could just want to connect.
We do have the possibility of a plan B, which is to go more to the discussion of Lijing Leng.
Yes,
that is a plan B that we could do.
Yes, I think we could just save time and could go. There are a few comments which are there in the comment box, and I think we could take that first. And here we go. Yeah. So there is one comment from Shingui Du, and they say that thanks, Lijing. As you said, that the dynamic capability building process is a long-term endeavor across various stakeholders, and also it is a time-consuming activity. So how the various stakeholders handle the discrepancy due to the lagging effect in terms of time and regions. Moreover, who will dominate in the capacity building process? Finally, the innovation system, pragmatic oriented, market oriented. What about the contribution to theoretical process? So if Lijing is here, she wants to respond to this question. Is she here? Lijing?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. Would you like to respond?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. This question is about the dynamic capabilities building, and this is a good question. And when I read the literature about dynamic capabilities, I have found many paper research. Many people exploit the building of the dynamic capabilities, but this question is not the focus of my paper. And I have read the literature, and they focus the dynamic capabilities building about cooperation and networking and so on. And about the innovation. Wait a moment. About the innovation. Innovation in my paper, because we focus on PRO and their rapid response to external innovation needs. Because our studies context is developing countries. In developing countries, firms' innovation capabilities is limited, which must be supported strongly by government and PRO. So for PRO, they should not only conduct basic research, but also pay close attention to the innovation needs of firms. So in this sense, the innovation of PRO is market direct, and only by this they can give full play to their roles. And about the theoretical advance and theoretical progress, I think when they respond to the innovation needs and their basic research is also improved at the same time, and the theoretical process and the market direct is improved at the same time. This is my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lijing, for your response. We will be carry forward this discussion in the later form, and we are happy that David has again joined us, and we will continue with his presentation. David, yeah, please you continue. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for that. You know, shit happens. But well, I'm focused on that and continue. Well, I was saying about the transfer process as a causal mechanism and its components. Well, I did an assimilation of the Evans and Davis model as a causal mechanism, and I use the 12 stages of the model as part of the causal mechanism. That's important to say that the process tracing seeks to identify the causal change and the causal process, the causal mechanisms. The causal mechanisms are not causes. They are causal processes that are linked between them, and they link, of course, the main cause with the outcome. So that's the way I use this assimilation of the transfer process as the causal mechanism of the process tracing. Well, the operationalization of the methodology I use, well, I had to theorize the causal mechanism, its observable traces, and the empirical reference I propose. So I identify on time the different empirical reference, the main events that were happening in the Mexican history of the policy, of the STI policy, to identify how was happening the changes along the time. So one of the most important for me was the frame of NAFTA in 1994, and in the same year, Mexico entries to the OECD as a member. And then, well, many other changes were happening, and events were influenced the policy. So that's the way I theorize the causal mechanism in order to be able to do a process tracing method. Well, as I said before, I did a documentary review from the special science and technology programs, general science and technology laws and the reforms in Mexico, and some selected programs along the 30 years. And well, I also interviewed the 23 key informants between decision makers, stakeholder representatives, and STI experts in Mexico for do that. That's some sample of that. And well, what were my research finding and conclusion? Well, the main conclusion was is that the transfer of STI policy from the OECD to Mexico did indeed take place. This process has been long. It started with the diagnosis of the problem on the Carlos Salinas period in the early 90s, and continue until the end of the presidential term of Enrique Peña Nieto in 2018. Well, but the transfer of the OECD policy went through two transfer processes. As I thought in the hypothesis, I thought that it was a long transfer process, just one. I identified, I find that they were two processes. The core of the first process was the 1994 OECD study on Mexico science and technology policy on that time, and the second, the core of the second transfer process was the OECD studies of 2009. Also, well, the transfer effectively was guided by the OECD, but that was supported by a constellation of other international organizations that demonstrate the consensus of an extended epistemic community and the international tendency with respect to the contemporary paradigm of innovation. Among these organizations, we can find ECLAC for Latin America, of course, UNESCO, IDB, and World Bank, among other. And it also demonstrates that this theoretical body is in ascent and evolution. What was transferred were fundamentally paradigms and discursive frameworks. It means ideas, concepts, and theoretical frameworks on innovation and innovation systems that were changing along this time. They were oriented to the policy towards the generation of a favorable environment for interaction, understanding more and more about the systemic nature in which the relationship between actors, government, academic, industry, intermediate institution, etc., well, were needed to detonate for the innovation. But also what was transferred was policy structure, content, and instruments reflected in the STI policy mix of the different administration along the period. Among the instruments directly transferred was the direct and indirect support, the PEI, the Programa de Estímulos a la Innovación, was one of the flag of the Mexican government during the last two periods, and other policy guidelines on governance of the system, coordination, promotion of the interaction and networks, and well, another as modernization, academy, industry linkages, technology transfer, technology-based entrepreneurship, among others. Well, I am getting to the end about the findings related with the hypothesis. Well, about the question why the change happened. Well, the only feature of the hypothesis that was maintained in the findings was the reason for the transfer. The transfer was the willingness of the national agents to change the policy with the support of a model and external advice. It means that it was completely voluntary. There was no coercive or another. It was simply the willingness of the Mexican agents. And the changes in STI policy, or well, at the beginning, science and technology policy to incorporate innovation, were derived from the change of direction in the country's economic development model in the late 80s and the early 90s. Well, the change to a new economic model tending towards trade liberation and globalization led to changes in the orientation of S&T policy aimed at science and technology activities to support the productivity and competitiveness. About the how the policy changed. Well, the findings I had is that the hypothesis was partially confirmed, since certainly the changes in the policy were oriented by voluntary transfer, in addition to the fact that a network for transfer emerged and a local epistemic community was built on the paradigm of innovation and the national innovation system. However, a fundamental aspect that was not contemplated in the hypothesis is that in reality there was not one transfer process, but two transfer processes. I have here the characterization of the two transfer processes. I'm not going to take them completely, but I want to highlight that the Mexican actors were very committed with this transfer and to learn from abroad, and also the main stakeholders that were participating they were building along the period as the ADIAT or another as FOMEC, or even the public research centers of the system of the CONACYT, that is the agency, the Mexican agency that managed the STI policy. And well, yeah, in fact, the OECD was the main actor talking about the international epistemic community that was supported by another international organization also. Well, I have talked about the reasons and the object of the transfer before, and well, the place that were taken the policy, the STI policy, was the OECD, as I said before. But it is interesting that the degrees of transfer, because talking about the recommendations in the first process, just the 60% of the OECD recommendation were taken into account in the laws and special programs of the Mexican STI policy. For the second transfer process, just the 58% of the recommendations were addressed also in the law, and the reforms were made to the law. And well, the limitation of the transfer at the beginning was that the epistemic community was under construction. The value system were not extended. But for the process, transfer process, the epistemic community was in strengthening. It means that the value system was not completely widespread, but it was growing. So another limitation is the insufficient public funding that has been remained almost the same along the period. That it is less than the 0.5% of the GDP, even when the Mexican law established that it has to be at least the 1% of the GDP for STI activities. But well, it is just word in the law, but not in the facts. So I conclude with this. I just show the timeline of the STI policy transfer process right now. That well, you can see the different the stages of the two processes. At the same time, you can see the tipping points in which we can identify the main changes. And as I said before, the core of the transfer processes were the studies of the OECD studies in 1994 and in 2009. And well, it would be everything by the moment, but I appreciate your time, and I hope to listen to you for your comments and questions and whatever you want to say about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for a very interesting presentation on a very interesting topic about policy change and policy transfer. And with this, now I invite Andrew Robert Cummings for the initial comments. He is a member core committee, Chris, and he has a PhD from Department of Development and Planning from the University of Alba, with research specialization in the emergence and evolution of innovation capabilities and territorial system of innovations in the Central American and Latin American context. And he also focused upon innovation in social enterprises, small-scale rural agro-industry for more inclusive and sustainable development. So I invite Andrew for the comments. Yeah, Andrew. You are
now
muted. Yeah.
Great. So thank you very much, David. David, I was saying that there's a consensus within LALIX, at least, and I think GlobalIX, I would say, to see the importance of bringing more political science perspectives in. Is everything okay? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, more political science perspectives, and I think the policy tracing methodology is really an example of this, the kind of tools that the political science has to analyze this kind of problematics. So I think that's good. You're also facing a challenge of crossing borders, but you have some background in technology policy. So I think you're in an interesting place to make a contribution to our community. In terms of some details, let's see here. Let's see if I can make sure that I keep on time. I'm sure, Swati. So the first thing that my supervisor would always ask me if I presented this is, well, really, what's the problem? And so, there is the policy has changed, but the problem remains the same. Why did the policy change? And in addition, how did it change? This leads to an analysis of dynamics of STI policy in a given time frame. That's great. You have a research question, why and how did it change? and then an objective on analyzing the reasons, mechanisms, results of this change. The first question is, okay, what is the real societal, social, economic development problem that justifies your research? I know this is important within GlobalX to connect this to development. And I also say, you know, how is your research relevant to the actors that you're studying? That would just be interesting to hear. Then more in your field, how do you actually define policy? Because it seems like you're talking about design, right? The written, formalized policy documents and how that design has changed over time. But we know within your field, you really look at a policy process that goes through design, through decision-making, through implementation, through evaluation, through a new assessment. So I wonder if what elements of this policy change are you really studying? I think it doesn't say you have to study more, but I'd just like to know if you could be clear on, you know, what elements of the process are you actually studying? The second is, what type of innovation policy are you studying? And I think this is my perspective from being here in Latin America. There's frequently a really big division. There are the people that say we're doing science and technology and innovation policy. They added the I, that's what you're, I think, focusing on. But there's a whole other area of industrial policy, productive transformation, innovation policies that frequently actually have a lot more money. They have ministries that are a lot more powerful involved. So I wonder in Mexico, if you could at least acknowledge that, you know, there's this whole other group, or maybe it's not true. Maybe they're actually merging, and what you're actually seeing and you're studying is the merging of these two powerful, the more academic and the more science and technology group with this more productive transformation and agricultural transformation group. So I would ask, how is the formulation of the public problems in STI sector related to these other sectors and innovation policies, especially oriented towards their development? You do say there's a recognition of a lack of linkage between productive sectors and STI. There's a low productivity and competitiveness in business. I wonder if there's a disconnection between those promoting economic development policies that include innovation and those with much less budget and much less political clout that are talking about STI policies. And maybe that's a real problem that isn't being identified. That's more in the content, but it's like setting up the scene. What actually are we looking at when you talk about policy in Mexico? And I had I can see better now from your presentation, but I was wondering, is this transfer? Is it adoption? Is it dynamic assimilation? Or is it endogenous change and transformation? And you do clarify this, and you know, but I think you could just say what you put out there is that it's about change, and then your conclusion is about transfer. I still really wonder if they're how they relate, and if in fact that if transfer is the only thing you need to talk about when you talk about change. And I guess I started off in a policy transfer in a way that I didn't really understand your theoretical framework. I think with your explanation of your theoretical framework, it becomes more clear, but at least to a lot of people that might be a little bit fuzzy. And you might actually think, why is the title transfer when then he's talking about change? So questions, how much room for maneuver does Mexico really have for STI policy in relation to the OECD to the NAFTA trading partners, to neoliberal policy guidelines, and now international STI policy trends. To what extent was STI policy institutionalized as a state policy, or did it actually change with every government? Those were some more pragmatic questions that came up. Try to stop here. Along those lines, you put the hypothesis out there and you tell us you only validate part of the hypothesis, but what was the real motivation of the national agent? I wonder, they're almost monolithic in the sense that they had a willingness to change. Were they in fact monolithic set of actors? What about industrial? There's a whole other group of industrial policy actors. Were they influential? Were they willing to change? That's some questions that came up. And the last slide, the main reason for change was that the economic development policy changed. That's your sort of central conclusion. Would they not have changed this policy if it hadn't been instrumental to a broader change in the development model? I mean, what are some other questions around your conclusion that could come up that might be worth discussing? There's my time, so I'll be ending. Were the changes in economic policy also their own ideas? Or did they also come from the OECD? Was this like part of a whole package that was coming that they basically didn't have much room for maneuver to take on if they wanted to be part of OECD, if they wanted to be part of NAFTA? Didn't they just have to do this? So sort of, you really put a lot of weight on the endogenous capabilities for making decisions, and I wonder about that. I'd like you to sort of, fundamental ground that a little bit. So I'll finish there. What elements were ignored and why? Actually, that's you say they're only 60%. Why were the other elements not taken up? Anyways, then we would have a change, but you're not going to discuss this, which was actually GlobalX a relevant actor? Were we as a systems of innovation thinking group that included people in Mexico actually relevant? But I'll leave that. That's more of our own introspection. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much again, Dave.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for a detailed comments to the author. Thank you very much. Now I invite Professor Baskaran for his comments on the paper. Yes, please.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you, David, for your very interesting paper. I really, I was fascinated by the paper, and especially the methodology and the theoretical framework, which was very, new to me and very interesting. I found it very interesting. Anyway, as I mentioned to Lijing, I will do the same style of feedback, keeping in mind that you are a young researcher, you want to publish your paper and research, and I will give feedback on how to improve for a paper publication in a journal. Okay. First of all, the change in the title. Again, you just make it simple: the evolution of science, technology, and innovation policy in Mexico, 1988 to 2008. So that will be straightforward, simple title. You start with the research approach, which is very strange to me. Usually you should do an introduction or a background section where you can explain. Yes, of course, you have identified the problem statement. The S&T policies face the dilemma, paradox of change to stay the same. In other words, if the policy has changed, but the problem remains, you have identified a list of problems which is persistent over the years in the history of Mexico. So So you are not really into whether these problems are addressed or not. You are into how these policies have been changing, but the problem remains. That's very interesting. So what I suggest is you try to keep the introduction with that problem statement in a better organized way, and also present your research questions in that section instead of keeping it. In thesis, okay, you have a separate section for research questions, fine. But when it comes to your paper, you may be integrating the research question and also provide a statement as the significance of your research. What is the original research? I think it's you have a lot of originality, your methodology, theoretical framework, and so you have a lot of things to say there. You have, of course, you have used one research question: why and how did the change in science technology policy happen to incorporate innovation in Mexico during the period from 1988 to 2018? And of course, you have shown in your slides 2 separate questions and corresponding hypothesis. Maybe you consider breaking it up, this question, into sub questions to show much more interesting analysis. It's my suggestion, but it's up to you. But what I could not see in your paper is, I don't know, maybe you didn't really draft it, but you need to provide a literature review section separately, where you can discuss about relevant literature. So that's very important. As I said, the theoretical framework and analytical framework, which I found it very interesting. And however, what's not clear is whether you are applying this DM model and END model separately or combined or integrated them into one framework to apply. Even in your presentation, I suspect you are trying to apply them separately. So in the paper, there is no discussion about it, how you are applying this two models into your analysis. So that's very important to explain. You have provided some figures, illustrating this theoretical framework in the presentation, but I have not seen anything in paper. So I think the theoretical framework needs some, reorganization and coherent presentation of your arguments, and also clarity. The methodology, I think before you straight away jump into hypothesis, I think you better discuss the research methodology used, because this qualitative study is a very historic study. So you need to explain, what's the research methodology you have adopted to your study. It's 30 years of, policy changes analysis. So you have to explain the qualitative approach you employed and the justification for it. And again, you need to provide description of your data collection. In the presentation, you mentioned you did something 23 respondent interviews, but there's nothing in your paper. I didn't see anything. So you have to explain how many interviews were conducted, who are the respondents, are they come from same background or different backgrounds? And when did you conduct this interview? How did you conduct this interview? There are some indications required there. And you need to provide also secondary data. So because it's a lot of historic documents, archival documents have been used, you need to provide a detailed discussion about these archival source of data. You mentioned something in the presentation, but I think it's important when you write a paper, you pay more attention to that. Again, I saw that the research gap and literature review. So you mentioned the research gap and also methodological contribution in this section. You must discuss research gap in the literature review. And methodological contribution also you can mention in the original contribution of your research in the introduction itself. It's a selling point. The most important thing I was looking in your paper is how you applied this process tracing, the method. Of course, you've shown in a figure the transfer process, causal mechanisms, and using DMM model and all. But I was trying to really, I was keen on how you did this, apply this for data analysis, and how you are able to capture the policy changes, the process, the process transfer tracing, and the transfer process, how you are able to do that. But in the slide, you've shown a couple of slides, but there is nothing in the paper itself very clear connection between your framework and the data analysis. You straight away went to findings and conclusions. So I was looking for that. Maybe, I don't know, the draft you are not completed, but keep that in mind, yeah. Findings and conclusions, yeah, it's very interesting. You need to, however, systematically present, analyze the data for respective periods when the STI policy is changed, and show the qualitative changes during each period. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Again, I'll as I mentioned to Lijing, you have done a lot of qualitative interviews. Since you have done so many interviews, you should use them effectively in your paper. You should bring direct quotations from the respondents to highlight and make a point and argument. And that's more powerful, because this is a historic analysis. The interview data, the way you utilize in your paper is very important. Otherwise, you lose. What is the purpose of interviewing 23 people and you have not a single quotation in your paper? It makes no sense to me. Yeah. So overall, I think a lot of restructuring, rearranging, and including a lot of interesting things you have shown in the PowerPoint, which are missing in the paper. So I hope I gave you some idea. Yeah, what are the things you need to do to improve the paper? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Baskaran. It was really very insightful, your comments, and I'm sure David is going to be benefited a lot with your comments for making his paper publishable. Now I invite Professor Edward Lorenz for his comments. Professor Lorenz, please.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. I'll just make a few additional comments. I think Andrew and Baskaran have covered the main points I had thought about, and others as well, thoroughly. I think, yeah, I like, as Andrew said, the idea of bringing political science, integrating this kind of research and methodologies into the IS approach. And some of the points that I think, as Baskaran was saying, which the paper rose as problematic, you actually addressed in your PowerPoint and your presentation, because you did a lot more on the methodology and on the nature of the transfer process, what you call transfer process. And that wasn't really laid out in the paper, but you've got this model going through successive stages, perception, onto later on evaluation, decision, and then process and outcomes, and so on. That gives us a better idea of how you see the process. One thing I was a little bit surprised, though, you see it as a sort of a linear process in time, because you have process and outcomes come at the end from 2008 to 2018, and recognition and all these other stages occur before 2008. Well, I would imagine there would be much more process outcomes back to recognition, reevaluation. It'd be more an interactive, iterative process than a linear over time process, but that's just a query. Perhaps you could comment on that. And then the point that Andrew raised, is that, I mean, I think it's a very rich paper and it's getting a very complex evolutionary changes over time. Is it mainly, because we're looking at the idea of innovation being brought into ST policy, which may have been, was it actually named science and technology policy up until a certain point, and then the I came in. And of course, the OECD has been promoting that extensively in its members. So the emphasis on the OECD, but are you really talking about a policy transfer or about a transfer of vision? This seems to be more about the vision of what we're trying to, a kind of a vision of what the orientation. That is to say, now we're focusing on innovation, not just science and technology, but the actual concrete policies is not what you're really, it seems to me, what you're really dealing with. And to understand those policies, I would think you'd have to then go inside to the ministries that are responsible, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Industry, and others, I don't know, that are responsible for implementing policy, and look at the political dynamics within them, the existing silos, the extent of coordination, the vested interests, all these internal conflicts that would have to be part of the dynamic of any, and of course, successive administrations and governments that might end up changing things dramatically. So I guess that would be, maybe the word transfer is this is the right word, because the policies, it seems to me, are things that will come out of this endogenous internal dynamic, may be influenced by some of the vision that's coming from the OECD. But I would say, are we dealing mainly with this broad vision of what we should be focusing on, innovation and not just science and technology? Or are we actually looking at a transfer of explicit policies? And if the latter, then I think you need to go farther and take the discussion into what was actually implemented much more concretely. So that would be just a query. And I agree with, these qualitative studies. So it's always very useful for the reader to see how you decided on your decisions about who to speak with, what kind of interviews, how many, and what were the choices you made and why. And that would be part of, I think, a paper would have to provide some, at least a box with, a list of what kind of actors were interviewed, discussed, and what kind of questions were posed. That would be very, very helpful, I think, and would probably be expected in a qualitative study of the sort. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor Lorenz. Quite interesting. Now I'm just quickly going to David for his quick response to the comments which he has got. Yeah, David.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for the comments and the questions. As I can see, there were a lot of questions. So for me, that's important because it means that two possibilities, that I went not very clear, or that the topic is so interesting that, of course, it brings these questions, these doubts about what I was saying and what were the results of my research. So I would like to answer everything, but I see that there is more question on the chat. So what I just limit to say that, yeah, there is a lack of information on the paper that there is in the presentation. It is my mistake, but well, yeah, I wanted to say that the process tracing it's more detailed than I could explain on my presentation. It brings a narrative, a complete narrative of the events that explain better what were the changes over the time. So it is easier to identify the changes, the specific changes, the changes into the instruments, the policy mix instruments, and how they were evolving. One of the main challenges I had were that at the same time the innovation policy were being applied the theory, the innovation system theory was also developing at the same time. I mean, during the 90s and also in the early 2000 years, well, the innovation system where the literature were growing. At the same time, the policy, the STI policy, it was applying in Mexico and all around the world. So it was difficult to me and was challenging to identify the changes in policy. In the meantime, the theory also was evolving. So that's the reason I took the OECD model as the framework that I could take to try to identify the recommendation of a policy, innovation policy, in the Mexican case. But well, I appreciate all your comments. I know that there is some issues I can improve. So well, I appreciate if Dr. Andrew could share to me his presentation, and well, I will take into account all your comments. Thank you, Professor Ned, Professor Baskaran, and of course Andrew for your comments. And sorry for there are a lot of questions in the chat, but I'm not sure if we have time for that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David, for your response. As you could see, there are really very specific questions and comments for you and for Lijing. And I would first like to invite Professor Salvo because he wrote very specific questions and comments in the chat box. We would like to hear him, so that we could have he's here. Welcome, Professor Salvo.
Okay, yeah, I'm here. Sorry, very interesting presentation. I think David already answered on the first question, which is probably shift from science and technology policy as a sectoral policy towards system innovation approach. Yeah, so, but that has to be quite clearly articulated, I think. So you basically know it, but it was not clear in the presentation. My second question is this: why, how these national networks emerged out of blue? That is quite not clear. What were the driving factors to that? I have it in the chat, and why there was no kind of, usually when you have a policy transfer, if it is serious, then some people are losing, some are gaining. Your world is like deprived of any power politics there. Is it because this was a simply change of rhetorics, change of discourse, which really didn't touch any real interest, or actors were hoping that they will all adjust to that? Is that somehow linked then to the very partial implementation? So this is for me the biggest problem. The focus should be basically on the partial transfer of the policy instrument. How do you explain that? Is it related to administrative capacity? Is it related to resistance? What are the drivers of that? So I have a kind of lots of interesting, relevant questions, but because you have done so many interviews there, so I'm sure you are able to answer that, but somehow that didn't come through your presentation. So I apologize, because I really judge everything just based on your presentation. I didn't have a chance to read the paper, so thank you.
Yeah, on that topic, I could say that there were this partial transfer because I just reviewed the legal documents. So these recommendations were just identified in the plans and programs and some instruments, but in the legal part. But what happened? Why they were not a complete transfer? What I could get from my informants, that was that there is not the idea of a state policy. I mean, there is not the intention of the government, of the central government, to take the innovation as a part of a policy state. I mean, in the narrative, in the discourse, of course, it sounds very good that when they talk about innovation and science and this politics, but it was not strengthening with the instruments and with the budget and with the money that is needed for the centers to arise the linkages of the innovation system. So it is a political issue, according with my informants. It is sad, but it is the one of the big topics, and that's the reason because I was interested for this topic about innovation policy, because I have no doubt that it works. But in countries as Mexico and other developing countries, the political issue it is very important to achieve the innovation policy.
Well, just a final comment. When economy says it's a political issue, then people are happy. But when political scientist says it's a political issue, that basically it's a big black box. The whole point is you to uncover exactly why it is political and what are the differences in interest. So that's actually the most relevant. So somehow you were happy to stay on the level of normative documents.
Yeah.
The point is that you have a huge then scope for bringing that, in a sense, political dimension in your policy analysis. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think so. That, well, it is a weakness, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now, I just see that there are a couple of questions from Xingui Zhu for both the paper presenters. So I also invite him or her. Please kindly go ahead and ask your questions directly. Xingui Zhu. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, okay, I have a question for David. So, and in your presentation, I'm attention that you mentioned that in the STI changes, and seems like the change route is the result from the your government and the OECD, the international organization. And during the changes, the OECD seems play a more effective role in this changing process. So the central government, I mean the Mexico government, will lose some independent control in the STI changes. So what's the main role for the domestic players such as the central government, the local stakeholders, not the outside influencers? So what's your explanation to these changes?
Okay, thank you for your question. The brief answer would be that when Mexico enters to the OECD and Mexico firmed the NAFTA, they were, I would say that optimistic feeling around many of the political actors, but also in stakeholders and in academic representatives. And also when the policy were building, these stakeholders also participated of the formulation of the policy.
Yes.
But they listened carefully to the recommendation of the OECD, because this is the role of the OECD to show the best practices around the world to improve the policies in the developing countries, or well, in any country, but the developing countries are very interested about what said this organization, this international organization. And well, even at the beginning of the applying of the policy, the budget was increasing briefly, but it was increasing. So many of the stakeholders were happy for saying in certain way of the changes in the policy. So that was the reason they participated, but they accepted the guide of the organizations as OECD.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now I could see that there are some questions by Martin, and kindly, you can just directly ask both the paper presenters your question. Is Martin Mabaya here?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Martin, doctoral fellow, PhD candidate. My question for the first presentation was associated with methodology, same as the second. For the first presenter, is it possible to add a case study that looks at a private university? I know the primary focus is public research organizations. If you added a private university, could that assist with issues of heterogeneity? I don't know if there are any good examples in China. For the second presenter, these ideas also for future studies, could the hypothesis also be tested in future through a quantitative study? Still testing the exact same hypothesis. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. This the comment which he'll take, and later on he may respond. Now I also invite Professor Susan Cousin is here for her comments to the paper presenters. Professor Susan, are you here?
I am here, indeed.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
So because of the change of time, actually, I didn't hear the first paper, so I will have to pass on that opportunity. But I certainly wanted to tell David how pleased I am to see actually policy studies perspective coming into our work in GlobalX, because we are so overwhelmed with economists often in this network. And economists sometimes wander into areas that political scientists have been studying for quite a long time. And it really helps to have some real live political scientists in the discussion, in the discourse. So, and I also, I heard Slavo's comments, and I understand all the limitations of analyzing policy documents only. However, having tried to do interviews in Mexico, including in one of my Spanish language colleagues tried, and it's very hard to get interviews. So getting perspectives on the system that are not normative, as Slavo says, I'm really sympathetic about how difficult that's going to be, and particularly in the current environment, which we haven't even referred to in relation to your work, and that's fine because it doesn't come into your paper. But I just want to reinforce how important this area is. And in fact, because as a GlobalX community, we really want to be involved in shaping policy in the way, in shaping the process that you've actually made your empirical object of attention. And so it's super important for us to recognize that it is not just a process that absorbs insights from the innovation studies community, that it has its own dynamics, it has its own actors, and that we are among those actors, but we are by no means the only one. And therefore, the kinds of recommendations that tend to come out of innovation studies work are, some would be very proud if they're being apolitical, but in fact, that means they're going to have very different consequences in very different, in different places. And I think your work really helps us to recognize that the reverberation of ideas that come out of innovation studies in local context. So I thank you very much for it. I enjoyed the paper. I would actually love to have you send me both the paper and the slides, and we'll look forward to following your work.
Thank you very much, Professor Susan. It was very interesting to see you and to hear you. Would you like to respond to the questions which you got? And at the same time, more questions are invited. So you may just write in here or just raise your hand if I miss any. So, yeah. Yeah, yes, please. I think we should be having the final word from both the presenter from Lijing. We should start from you. So, and then to David. So overall, if you want to give some responses to the comments or suggestions which you have got, I could just for Lijing, if I may just go. Andrew has actually asked you one question, which I missed. If Andrew could ask himself.
I do very much appreciate. I didn't get to read your paper, Lijing. I appreciated your well-structured presentation. I think there's a lot of richness that you have in what you're doing. I was wondering about networking capabilities, and if you could talk about the capabilities of these actors to network with the others and how you would relate that to the dynamic capabilities. We know that in relation to innovation capabilities, networking capabilities are fundamental, but again, we usually talk about those in businesses and not in this kind of intermediary agents, which I think are a very important object of study. So thank you again. I look forward to hearing something about networking capabilities.
Yes, thank you, Professor. And your question is about the networking capabilities and dynamic capabilities. There are three elements of dynamic capabilities, as you can see in my paper about sensing, seizing, and transforming. And the interaction between innovation agents or cooperation or networking between innovation agents is the core of the in relevant literature, and I have read about meta literature, and by interacting with other innovations or cooperating with other innovation agents, PRO can better respond to the change of external innovation needs. And this is emphasized in my paper. I think, in my opinion, the networking capabilities is the core of dynamic capabilities. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lijing. It was quite good. Now, David, would you like to respond to the comments and suggestions which you have got?
Well, no, sorry. In this moment, I am a little bit overwhelmed. I think that I don't know. I appreciate your comments. I know that there are lack of information, but also this is an opportunity, a field of opportunity to improve with all your comments. Just I was reading this Labo question of the chat, and I would like to point some things a little bit. He said, what was changed in the S&T paradigm about, well, mainly was the linear paradigm of the innovation, and well, it changed to the more complex process of innovation. But well, I wouldn't like to forget to someone, so it's better for me to end in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and I thank both of you for such a good paper presentations, and I also thank the commentators who specifically read the paper and gave very useful comment to both the authors to improve their paper, and all the participants for a very interesting discussion which we have had today. So it was really very all because of these two good presentation which we had. So thanks a lot, and we will be with this, I think we should end this session, and we would be looking forward to the next session, and we just like to have you all here next time. And with this, I thank you all once again for joining and for participating in this in such an overwhelming manner. So thanks a lot. Thank you.
I think we should encourage David for his PhD defense. He got a good pre-defense today.
Yes.
Very good luck on your defense.
Yes.
Good luck, David. I liked your paper, and Lijing also, I liked your paper. It's really interesting to see how the young generation doing interesting research, especially David, your paper as you're from political science, so interesting, fascinating methodology and theoretical framework. I wish you all the best. Lijing, same to you. One of my PhD from China is working on dynamic capabilities in SMEs. So I see this is a very, good topic. You have a good, as a young researcher, you can pursue really good, near future research in this field for quite some time. Yeah.
There is one announcement. On 13th of this month, we are presenting a conversation between Richard Nelson and Franco Malaba. So we invite all of you to participate. Don't miss this opportunity. And this is going to innovation scholars of current times. Just to get to know them, how they evolved, what were their inspirations, etc., from their own mouth. So we invite all of you to be part of this series, the new series. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Rajesh, for organizing this series of webinars. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Really.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, all.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor. Bye.
Thank you, Ned,
See you
also
all.
for your coming in on the fly there, and doing some really positive commentary.
Thank you.
Hope it was helpful to fly. It's good to see you all anyway, in any case.
Yeah.
It's a good to have these sessions, and we understand we're a large world community. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see. We saw China, and it was, I thought anyways, it was an interesting event